any other knowledge that you have. Sound has a physicality. Sound is a measurable, palpable thing that has weight to it. So what is sound? I'm going to make a sound right now. Here we go. Ready? So what just happened there? What was that? Well, in order for there to be sound, there has to be a medium. There has to be something for it to travel through. So in this case, it's air. And when I made that clapping sound, the air around my hands was compressed in the immediate area around my hands. Because that's one of the cool things about air is that you can compress it, right? You can compress it and put it in a compressor and shoot it. You can compress it in a hurricane and blow over buildings. Air is compressible and expandable. So I did this, and a little ring of air around my hands, the molecules were compressed. But of course they don't just stay there, they travel through the medium. And this little wave of denser molecules traveled to your eardrum. And because molecules have weight, when they hit your eardrum reacted and went, it moved, it physically moved. And then our genius brain interpreted that motion and goes, oh, somebody clap their hands. Because I have the circuitry up here to interpret sound to an amazing extent. So, you know, if you closed your eyes and I went like this, you wouldn't go, oh, what was that? No, no, no. Your ears can interpret that as a clap. So once again, sound is waves of compressed molecules of air. The air's here all the time. But just imagine, like, you take some of, let's say it's all evenly distributed in the room. You take one bit of it. Let's say here's the air in the room. Just like this, random molecules. But then you have one band like this that's really dense. And that dense wave is traveling through the air till it hits your ear, moves your ear. That's what sound is. It's there whether there's anyone to perceive it or not. So I've not answered that age-old question. Yes, there is sound if the tree falls in the wood. There's nobody around to hear it. Okay. What is musical sound? And how is that differentiated from, you know, just noise? You know, any other noise. What? There's noise, so-called noise, meaning non-musical sound. And then there's musical sound. What's the difference? Well, you have these waves. Let's go away from the word wave for just a moment and call it a beat. So you have these beats. A musical sound is where you have a regular beat. In other words, in time, it has a regular interval to it, in time. So, I'm going to now clap a musical note. This is music. Why? Because it has a regular beat to it. I'm clapping a note. That's a note that has a beat rate of about 1 beat per second-ish. Okay? So if you have a regular beat rate, where with even spaces between the beats in time, such as 1 every second, or I'm going to go up an octave. That's 2 beats per second. I just went up an octave. That's a note. And if I could clap my hands 440 times a second, which I actually can't do, you'd have a tuning note. That's all pitch is just a beat rate. It doesn't matter what the pitch source is. So, I mean, somebody on the video could speed me up, and I could clap a tuning note, or playing cards in the spokes of a bicycle are a note, or even a trombone is a musical note, believe it or not. Anything can be a musical note. In fact, there are musical notes in this if you could break them down. So a musical note, a musical sound, is an even beat rate. See how nice this is? It just proceeds step by step until you'll be so confused that you won't know anything. So this handout again is geared towards the performer. There will be some things that I'll skip around on. If there's time at the end of the thing, did you take a, yeah, we got all the handouts. If there's time at the end, I'll come back a little bit. But again, I'm trying to make this a survey where you understand intonation. And I think that, I hope at the end of my talk, if we look at this and go, meh. That's my hope. So anyway, I'm going to skip some of this stuff, except to say that you will hear the jargon. Hertz, you see the word there, H-E-R-T-Z. Hertz was a guy who was an early researcher in the world of sound. And so Hertz is synonymous with beat rate. Or I think I have it written as BPS, beats per second. Beats per second. So any pitch is so many beats per second. So here we're tuning at A440. Oh no, we're going to tune at A441. That would be 441 beats per second, etc. You could also say 441 hertz. It means the same thing. So I put that out there because for the longest time I didn't understand what hertz was. And then just briefly on your tuners for you instrumentalists who use little Seiko tuners, it's not calibrated in hertz, is it? It's calibrated in what? Cents. What's a cent? A cent is not a hertz. So I would like to make this clear because a lot of times people will think, well, I want to tune in 441, so does that mean I'm go 1 cent sharp? Well, no. A cent is a completely other measurement, which for now I'm not going to explain it in great depth, even though I'm dying to because it's so fun. but just take it for granted that, as I say here, if you want to tune your instrument up 1 hertz, in other words, if you want to go from 440 to 141 to 441, tune it up 4 cents. So, and then also the other thing about cents on your tuner is, if you're only going up, if you're going up 4 cents for every beat per second, a cent is small at 441. A cent is very small. So cut yourself some slack. If you're playing on your tuner and it's a cent sharp or flat, call that range perfect. Because a lot of people will kill themselves trying to get that needle to be right up or they think they're out of tune. Make perfect a range on your tuner of about a cent either way. It'll make you a lot more sane. And in the real world, really, if you are within that range, you are perfect. So those are little side notes about working with your tuners and working with cents. Okay, so we know what sound is, we know what musical sound is, so now we are up to intervals. And I've already given you kind of a sneak preview of what an interval is. An interval, of course, is a ratio. That's fine, you can sit right in front and yawn your head off if you want. I'm going to get you. You'll find yourself. An interval is a ratio of beat rates, right? So the simplest ratio of beat rates would be 1, 2, 1, which would be unison, same note. So here on my piano, I have 3 strings for every note. I'm going to mute off 1, so now I've got 2 strings. Wow, it's in tune. In a perfect world, I would have tuned this piano before the talk, so it's in tune. That's not too bad. That's actually 2 strings, so think of it as 2 different instruments. 2 violins or 2 whatever, 2 flutes. That's a unison. 1 to 1. If that beat rate is, say, 536, the other one's beat rate is also 536. They're in tune. The next most simple, so that's a unison. Gotta love the handwriting. Now the next one would be 2, 2, 1, which you probably heard me say is an octave. So let's make the math simpler. Let's go back to a note which has 100 beats per second, which is just an arbitrary amount. It's like about below A sharp or so, but it doesn't matter. It's a note that has a beat rate of 100 beats per second. So obviously, unison with 100 beats per second would be 100, and the octave up from 100 beats per second would be 200 beats per second. All right, and an octave above that would be 400 beats per second. And an octave above that would be 800 beats per second. You double the beat rate to go up an octave. All right? The next most, so that's an octave. There's a little bit of math involved, but don't get freaked out because it's all like this basic. So hang with me on the math stuff because it never gets worse than this. Okay? So 3, 2, 1 is a 12th, which is an octave and a fifth. So let's say that our first note was C. And then our octave, and then our 12th. That's 3 to 1. From this is beating 3 times. So if this is 100, this is 150. 3. No matter, and that's carried through no matter where. It doesn't matter where you are. If you have a frequency that's 20,000 hertz, then an octave above it is 40,000 hertz. It does not matter. Everybody remembers what hertz is? Beats per second. Okay? I like hertz because it's faster to say and kind of cute. So that's a 12th. And I'll bet that even on a Monday morning, I bet you can guess what the next one is. 4, 2, 1, which is the double octave, of course. Right? Well, I figured that out too. That's the double octave. So the first note, 2 to 1, 3 to 1, 4 to 1, 5 to 1, 6 to 1, 7 to 1, except we don't use that in Western music for reasons I would just love to take like 3 weeks to explain to you. And so on. And they 6 to 7, 8, 9, 10, 12, 13, 14, 15 to 1. Now, why am I making such a big deal about these whole numbers? Actually, let me hold that thought for a second. I'll get to that. Because probably the next thing is dissonance, right? This is where I can get all ugly on you. So what's dissonance? What's out of tune? What is dissonance? What is that? What's going on? Okay, well, if we visualize these beats as sort of like a whole row of long-distance runners, and they all stay exactly the same distance from each other because they're equal. You know, you don't have any split up, no, they're all exactly the same. They're all, let's say, 100 beats a second. And they're going through space. They're going through the air to your ears. But then you have another whole bunch of runners from another sound source, which is out of tune. It's 100.5 beats per second. So what do you have? You have, they start off good, but then some guys are going a little bit faster. So now they're not together anymore. And now they're together again. And now they're not together again. And as they go on, you have these two sound sources which mesh up sometimes and don't mesh up sometimes. When they mesh up, the energy that's in sound actually reinforces each note, each sound source reinforces each other, makes them stronger. But then when they're at their most diametrically opposed position, they actually sap energy from each other. And so the effect is that you get a wah, 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 wah of intensity that we find unpleasant. That's what dissonance is. So, I have my unison here, which is actually pretty good. Let's ruin it. So you get that. If I were ever writing my own, like Peter and the Wolf for animals, I'd make that the spider. It's so disturbing. So now let's listen to it go back into tune. Dissonance, out of tuneness, what we are trying to avoid, hopefully, unless of course it's any music written after like 1926, in which case all bets are off. Okay, so then that was a dissonance, double octave, okay, now, why was I making such a big deal about these whole tone, these whole number ratios? Because obviously there are other ratios. You know, you can have any other ratio. You can have, instead of 2 to 1, you can have 1.657 to 1. You know, obviously there are other ratios. The reason I'm making such a big deal about this is that this represents the overtone series. And here's where we get to the sort of like black hole, you know, quantum mechanics theory stuff where it's like different than you think it is. Overtones. What are overtones? Why are overtones? How do we use overtones? What are overtones? Okay, I'm now going to illustrate overtones by singing a note. Here we go. Okay, now please, by raise of hands, would you, is there an app on your phone for overtones? Then hang in there with me. Did anybody hear the overtones? And if so, please raise your hand. That you don't count. Okay, the thing is, all of you should have raised your hands because you so totally heard the overtones. And I can prove it to you because you knew that it was me singing, right? You didn't think it was a piano. You didn't think it was a trombone. Why? I sang a note that's on the piano, or a cello, or a woman. If I say, oh, I sang a high note, boy, do I not sound like a woman. How do you know? How do you know? It's because of the overtones. Going back to the thing I was saying about us being geniuses with our ears, we are incredible geniuses with our ears. Just think about this for a second. Not only do you know that I'm not a trombone, I say that to be funny and to be obvious, but think about it. If you're someone that you know well, if your mother, girlfriend, boyfriend, sister comes up behind you and says, "Hi, Biff," you don't have to turn around to see who that person is, right? You know who that person is. How could you know? If it's your father, how could you know among all the voices of men that you ever hear, how do you know that that's your dad, your one and only dad? How do you know? Because his voice has a certain signature to it that your brain interprets, and it's all about the overtones. But it's even more than that. If dad has a little cold, "Oh, Dad, wow, man, you don't sound too good. What, you got a cold?" Think about if you did like a spectrograph of your dad's voice with and without a cold. Think how slightly different that would be. If you actually measured it, it would be, you'd have to look with a microscope on the spectrograph to see the difference. And yet you don't have any problem. Even more than that, you think, "Oh, Dad, sounds like you got just a slight cold." "Oh, wow, Dad, you got a bad cold." Now, what's the difference between bad cold and slight cold on the spectrograph? It's like nothing. And yet you have a hard time. Or even more than that, if you are on the phone with Grandma, and she's coming through some horrible little, 1.5 cent microphone that's in your phone. "Grandma, I'd recognize your voice anywhere." So, and that's all to do with overtones. I'm kind of belaboring this point a little bit, I know. But I want you to understand the importance of overtones and the fact that you are just swimming in overtones all the time and interpreting them. They have those nature programs where the little seal pup finds their own parent and they all look the same to us. We're all those little seal pups. We can all understand familiarity and unfamiliarity, and it's all based on overtones. Why we've evolved this, I don't know. But it sure makes my life miserable because I have to tune piano so well because I can't fool anybody. Our ears are all so good. Okay, so that's what overtones are. But mathematically, physically, they are these exact ratios. So, if I go back and play those ratios, when I play this one note, you are again hearing all those overtones. They're all there. 2 to 1, 3 to 1, 4 to 1, 5 to 1, 6 to 1, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, and the overtones go out in the hall someplace. A healthy human can hear around 20,000 hertz, right? We're starting at 100. So you can hear hundreds of overtones, which gives you a clue as to why there are so many different sounds. Approaching an infinite number of sounds. It also begs the question, why are there any different sounds? If all notes have the same exact overtone series, then why doesn't everything sound like me? Why are there different sounds? If pitch is just beats per second, and if overtones are always the same, why is it different? Well, because different overtones can have a different strength to them. And when you have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of overtones, and each one can have a little different strength or weakness, it's almost like color, where I could add a little bit of yellow to this and change it, and how many greens are there? There's millions of greens, yet they're all kind of green. Because I can mix, or if I add a little red to it, I get brown. I can mix, I get a certain recipe for a certain sound, and that makes trombone-ness, or woman singing-ness, or your dad's voice-ness, because of the different strengths of the overtones. You're all with me so far? I really enjoy giving these talks because people, in every time, they troop in and they look at me and they go, "I'm about to spend an hour with a piano tuner. Shoot me in the head right now." And then, usually by the end of the class, I get people going, "Oh, well, that was kind of interesting." So I'm going to get you. So, ratios of overtones. I'm going to leave overtones for now and go on to temperaments because that is such, I think, an important part of what you're studying. Isn't that right? Temperaments, or is it just sort of all together for you? Like, somebody just tell me real quickly, is it like, are you emphasizing temperament or intervals, or just all of it kind of together? All together? Kind of like one thing? Okay. Well, I think you understand now what sound is. It's a beat. what musical sound is. It's a regular beat happening in time. You understand what overtones are. They're generated by the fundamental. I think I can do a little bit more on overtones. Let's try this. What I'm playing is that when I play this note, at the same time you are hearing and a whole bunch of other notes. So if that's true, then if I play this note and hold this note down, then you should be able to hear that when I play this. So let's try that. And you can also hear the octave. You're hearing it ring out because I'm holding the note down and the damper's up. It's fainter. Are you hearing it? Okay, so what's happening is the overtone of my note that I'm playing loudly is causing the other string to ring sympathetically. The vibrations of it are coming and causing it to move just like your eardrum, but it continues to ring because it's strung to ring on. So it continues to ring sympathetically from the overtone. We're swimming in overtones. Okay, now let's talk about temperament. And this is where I start to part company with your text. I hope this isn't representative. Not all intervals are exactly the same size today as they were in earlier times. Okay, this is eternal and universal, and if you went to Mars, these concepts would apply. This is sort of universal science, so the physics of sound has not changed over time. And I think that's sort of an important thing to remember because we're about to start talking about temperament, which is where you tune in different ways, and you tune in different ways for different reasons. But that doesn't mean that this changes in different temperaments. It's just a way of dealing with this stuff. So let's start with real tuning. You'll see that I was particularly violent with my highlighter on just intonation. Let me explain what just intonation is. Just intonation is beatless intonation. It's an intonation in which all of the overtones line up. If you have an interval, then all the overtones of this note line up with all of the overtones of this note. It's perfectly in tune. It's really the only tuning that there is. Everything else is a compromise. So when you say the word temperament, think the word compromise, because that's exactly what it is. For reasons that I'm about to explain, you can't tune a fixed pitch instrument just. You have to temper it. So let's start with just. So I'm going to play a just interval on this piano so that you know what it sounds like. So this is a tempered piano, so I have to change it. I'm playing a third. This is F A third. And I'm going to adjust the A so that it goes from being tempered to being just. And I want you to just listen to the quality of the sound. I'll go back to tempered. Now I'll go back to just. Tempered. Just. I don't know how you're perceiving that, but perhaps the tempered sounds a little busier, noisier. Some people say more colorful. People, have different ways of experiencing this. But is anyone not hearing a change? It's okay if you don't, really. I know this is new, so. Okay, good. So everyone's hearing the change. Good. So let's call that a pretty good just A. And just know, let me talk about the word for a second. You know, just, you think was just tuning. No, it's not that sense of the word just. It's the sense like justice, or a just person. This is just tuning. So why don't I tune like that? If it sounds better. Well, because that A not only functions as the third in the key of F, but it also functions as the fifth in the key of D. And if I leave that A where it is, I get this. Completely unacceptable, ugly fifth. So let me correct that. I've got a pretty decent, more or less just fifth, and look where I am back with a third. Even faster than it was before. So what do you do?
So what do you mean by faster?
Faster beat rate.
Can they hear that? Can you hear the beat rate?
I hope so. That's about 7 beats a second on that. 7 beats a second. Can you imagine that? On a properly tuned piano. 7 beats a second. That's about as fast as you can count to 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Isn't that amazingly out of tune? It was hard for me to learn to tune pianos after being a musician and always trying to tune beatless, to accept the fact. And yet we do. I mean, this is an in-tune piano. This is what you hear. When you hear a piano, it's always sort of like, I have to keep a straight face when people come up to me after a concert and they say, oh, your piano tune sounded so perfect. It was so perfectly in tune. I go, oh, thank you. Because we're a culture, really. It's our culture now to hear that as in tune. But it hasn't always been in our culture. And it's still not in all cultures to hear it in tune. And that's why we have temperaments, because a lot of people find that 7 beats a second absolutely unacceptable. And so they've come up with other methods of tuning. So, I mean, my God, when they say just intonation which flourished in the 15th century solved the problem, and I even looked online to see if maybe there was some tuning system that called itself just, and there isn't. So this is not correct in any way that I can find. So, what I tune in is equal temperament. And what that means is that every half step within the octave is of exactly the same size. In other words, the octave is divided into 12 equal parts. Equal temperament. Another way to think of it is, because I can't tune all of the keys perfectly in tune, I steal a little bit from all of the keys, so they're all equally out of tune. That's literally what I'm doing. Remember, temperament is compromise. So instead of favoring anybody, I'm going to say F sharp is going to be just as out of tune as C major, as B major, as A flat major, anything else. They're all equally out of tune, equal temperament. That's what an equal temperament is. There's only one of those two. It's an absolute just as much as just tuning was. So then you have unequal temperaments, which there are, I'm sure, thousands of them, because people are not, many cultures are not happy. They won't accept equal temperament because it's so out of tune. 7 beats a second is just, you know, unmusical to a lot of ears. I mean, certainly if I sat in the trombone section in an orchestra and played that A, so the beat 7 beats a second, the conductor would stop and say, you know, next. He would fire it. It would not be acceptable. We accept it on piano because we're used to that sound. And for those of you that are instrumentalists who are forced to play with that thing, haven't you noticed how different it sounds? If you are, you know, let's say you're singers and you're used to singing in a choir where you don't have fixed pitch instruments where you can adjust, you sort of naturally tend to adjust. But when you're with a piano, it's stuck on that one note and you have to conform to it. And it sounds different because it's tempered. So, anyway, in history, throughout history and continuing into today, people are trying to beat the system. They're trying to game the system and come up with a better system than equal temperament because they don't accept it. The problem is that everybody knows the phrase zero-sum game. That means that you can't generate any more of whatever it is that you want. You only have so much pie, and that's it. And so you can cut 12 equal slices, or you can cut one big slice and everybody else gets cheated and starved to death, but you can't make more pie. And tuning, temperament, is a zero-sum game. If you favor somebody, somebody else is going to suffer more. And so, nevertheless, there have been thousands of attempts to try to do it with all kinds of theories. That's what unequal temperaments are. That's what so-called historic temperaments are. And they very much continue in use today. One of the things I particularly object to is, it says something about here, I don't know, someplace it says, here we are, in tuning systems, it says, in modern times, equal temperament has been accepted for nearly all written music in the Western world. That's far from the truth. People who perform Baroque music and Renaissance music, and even 19th century music more and more, have settled on other tunings which they consider to be more appropriate for that kind of music. And by the way, America has generated its own temperament. Can anyone have a sort of guess what that might be, the American temperament? It's an incredibly important one, especially for people of my generation who grew up with soul and rock and roll and Motown. African Americans came with their own temperament. So if you ever hear, 1001 strings playing, Stevie Wonder, no matter how good the arrangement is, why doesn't it sound right? Because they're playing with a Mozart tuning. And it just sounds kind of like Mozart a little bit, no matter what they do. It doesn't sound like Stevie. It doesn't sound like the great blues men of the 40s, 50s, and on. It doesn't have that African American sound. Why? Because it doesn't have the blue note. What's the blue note? That's a temperament. It's a note that's not on the piano. There is no one blue note, by the way. I ask people what the blue note is. No, what's minor third? Minor seventh? No. The blue note is where you tune in a way that it sounds right. I don't think there's any other way to say it than that. Yeah. That's what the blue note is. And you all know it when you hear it. And it's not a theoretical thing. I don't think those 14-year-old girls who were recording music in Detroit that went around the world and lived on fire, they weren't studying tuning. They heard it, and they just made it happen. And so I bring that up because temperament seems so theoretical when we talk about this stuff, and we talk about 1685 and all this history. But I think thinking about the African American temperament brings it home. Because you know how important tuning is when you think about it that way. Equal temperament. Coincident partials. Coincident partials. Okay, so a coincident partial. A partial is an overtone. It's another word for overtone. So when I was putting the unison out of tune on this, let me do it again so you hear that spidery sound. Sorry, not here. When you get an out of tune sound like that, what you're mostly hearing that's objectionable is not the fundamental. The fundamental is a ba. That's the note that you think you're only hearing. I'm putting it so slightly out of tune that that note is really not beating. Like, let's say again, if it were 100 beats a second, the other string is maybe 100.5 beats per second, which would take like maybe 4 seconds to beat. In other words, beating ba, wah. You're not going to perceive that as out of tune. What you're hearing are the overtones, because both of those, think of them as a stack of overtones. And the higher you get in the overtones, the faster they're individually beating, and the faster they beat against each other. So when you hear that sound, what you're perceiving is mostly higher overtones. You can't necessarily pick them out in your mind. And in fact, one of the most difficult things I think I've ever done in my life was to learn to isolate overtones, because it's really hard. It's not hard to hear them, but it's hard to consciously isolate one particular overtone. But that's what you're hearing, mostly, when you hear it out of tune. So that's called a coincident partial. In other words, both notes have the same partial. So how does that work with an interval that's not unison? Let me put this back in tune. Now, let me go back to my original thing here. This is my F8, it beats 7 beats a second. So I've been saying that as an absolute for simplicity, but it's actually beating 7 beats a second and a particular partial, which is that. That's a partial that both notes have. Both the F and the A have that in their overtone series. So I'm now going to demonstrate that for you. I'm going to do the same trick, the same little magic trick where I play the note, and you'll hear this note ring with a beat that's 7 beats a second because it's getting 2 sympathetic vibrations. You with me? Kind of? Listen. I don't hear it. Oh, bummer. It's not coming through. Huh. My power trick's not working. Let's try another one. You can hear that one, I hope. Here it's got a flutter to it. So not only unisons, but intervals have coincident partials. They have notes that are the same in their overtone series. So why am I belaboring this? Because when you're tuning an interval, let's say that somebody else in your group has that F, and you're trying to tune that A, you can listen in the overtones, and you can listen for the fluttering sound of the overtones. And that's how you tune with great precision. The tuning is in the overtones. What you're mostly hearing is objectionable is in the overtones. So how can you practice this in the real world? How can you make that happen? Well, if you are lucky enough to have a multiple pitched instrument, like a guitar or cello, violin, something where you can play 2 notes, you're luckier than I am with a single pitch instrument because you can play intervals on your instrument and you can slowly tune and listen for those overtones. And I have yet to have someone say, I just can't do that. Mostly people sit in this class and they go, yeah, well, that's nice for him, but I can't hear it. But if they really try it, after about a minute of really trying to hear it, it comes in. And you start to hear, oh, I heard it. That's it. I heard that flutter. And then it's a matter of practicing making the flutter come and go. And you'll realize how delicate and subtle tuning is. I don't know if you can see from what I'm doing there, but in order to make it go from sounding really nice to really bad, is a tiny little movement. Tuning is very subtle. So when you're tuning your instruments, tune in very minute increments. And when you're practicing, at least, tune very slowly so that you can hear those beats come and go. The more in tune you are, the slower the beat will be. So if you're in an ensemble and you feel like, oh, I think I'm out of tune, and I don't know which way to go, slowly go away. Just flip a coin, go away, but do it slowly. And if you hear the beat start to get faster, you're going the wrong way. And you'll find that with that technique, you'll get to the point where you can go very quickly. And you're not tuning like, no, they're incredibly subtle. Really so much so that really only you will kind of hear it. And the people that play really in tune, you think, oh God, she or he has such great intonation. They're doing that. They're playing out of tune for an instant. And they have practice, and they're hearing it, and they're bringing it in constantly, the whole time they're playing. So, intonation is in the overtones. This whole reason I belabor the overtones is because it is so crucial. Does everybody who plays well know about this? No, because they have the talent or they have the scope to hear it. But what they're actually doing is hearing the overtones and adjusting. So another important part about tuning is knowing where you are on the chord and knowing what to do when you're there on the chord. So a few quick rules of thumb on that. If you are the third of the chord, like that A in the key of F, you will tend to go down. So if you're playing an ensemble and you're wondering what you should do with intonation, if you can't hear it, ask the people around you, what do you have there? What do you have there? You have an F? I have an A. And you have a C? Okay, that's an F chord. So I'm the third, and you'll know that you'll want to tend to go down. If you're the fifth, you're going to want to tend to go up. So if you're the C in that key of F, you're going to want to slightly go up. It helps to know. So know where you are in the chords in order to play in tune. Okay, if we go down to item number 6 here, expressive tuning. I've already kind of touched on this a little bit, but I want to really expand on this because this is such an important aspect of tuning. Everything I've been talking about so far has been vertical. Just stacks of notes, stacks of overtones, and how these towering stacks interface with each other and what you can do about it. That's not the only aspect of tuning. There's also a horizontal tuning. A line has its own weights and desires. So, for example, the leading tone, which is the 7th note of the scale, it's just gotta resolve up. That's why it's called the leading tone. And if you're playing a scale or playing something where you get to the leading tone and you're going to resolve to the 1, you want to play a 5. Because it's a leading thing. And if you are playing an expressive line and you play it low, it's going to sound dull and it won't make sense. But that's a problem. That presents a problem, doesn't it? Because let's say that you're in the key of C. The leading tone is the B. It's resolving to the 1, so you want to play it high. But it's also probably the 3rd of a 5 chord. If you're on the B, there's probably a G chord happening. So you're a 3rd of that, which wants to be low. Remember, the 3rd of a chord wants to be low. So in the vertical world, you want to be low, and in the horizontal world, you want to be high. What do? How do you resolve that? Well, that's why it's expressive. You know, I'm now out of the world of science, and we're now in the world of artistry. You decide what sounds right to you. I can give you my opinions, your teacher can give you their opinions. But just know that there's a great expressivity to tuning. When, you know, for further listening, I include, down here at the bottom, I have Sarah Vaughan and Ella Fitzgerald. I don't know if any of you listen to some of these old jazzers, but I picked those as 2 brilliant examples, 2 geniuses of jazz, who have a very different approach specifically to intonation. You hear Ella Fitzgerald and she's like a diamond. She's just, no matter how fast she's scatsing or whatever she's doing, it's just every note is just beautifully in tune and it just resonates. No matter how fast she goes by, you just feel it. God, what a genius she was. Sarah Vaughan is smoky and mysterious and she'll hit a note low. And you think she's going to resolve it, but she just never does. Because she doesn't have to. She's just got you. She's incredibly expressive in a completely different way. And it's specifically to do with the intonation. Intonation is very expressive. So knowing this is important, and if you want to play Mozart, there's kind of one way to do it. But if you're going to play a romantic piece, or certainly if you're going to do soul, blues, rock and roll, keep in mind that intonation is a creative process. It's not fixed with fixed rules. And I think you can even sneak it in sometimes in Mozart if you do it with taste and judgment, because it's so powerful. You know, you guys are going now, right? Is that right? Well, now that there's 4 seconds left, is there anything that you wonder about, or are there any questions, or information for me, or corrections, or... Okay, well, thank you very much. My office is down at 151, so if anybody does have any questions, you want to come in and ask me anything, you know, I'm usually there, and don't be a stranger. Thank you very much.
Thank you.